How well does the top-end AMD GPU mine cryptocurrency? Well, obviously it depends on the cryptocurrency you were talking about. Today we are taking a look at the hash rates for the RX 7900 XTX. This particular model is the ASRock Phantom Gaming Overclock Edition. It features 96 compute units, which can reach a boost clock of 2,615 megahertz out of the box, which in theory should benefit core-intensive algorithms. On the memory side of things, it features 24 gigabytes of GDDR6 clocked at 2,500 megahertz, on a 384-bit bus, which results in a bandwidth of 960 gigabytes a second. This can be increased to over 1 terabyte a second with overclocking. Powering the GPU are three 8-pin PCIe power adapters, which can deliver well over 400 watts to the GPU with a recommended power supply of 1,000 watts. For testing, I utilized the Corsair HX 1200 watt PSU, and at these loads, it provides 87% efficiency, so you can keep this in mind as all power is calculated at the wall. To be clear, the riser and the card are powered by a separate PSU from the rest of the system for accurate readings. Cooling the card are three fans over a nickel-plated copper base. While they advertise premium thermal pads for the memory modules, they regularly go over 100 degrees Celsius when pushed to 2600 megahertz. For testing operating systems, HiveOS stable and beta images were tested, however the overclocks would not apply. Switching to MMPOS v4 resolved this issue out of the box and allowed full control over core clock, voltage, and memory clock. Now that we have the overview out of the way, let's discuss stock hash rates and the best miner out of the box for these units before choosing which miner to use for the overclocks. On Autolycos V2, which is a memory-intensive algorithm, the RX 7900 XTX worked on 4 miners: BZ Miner, Team Red Miner, Nano Miner, and SRB Miner, with Team Red Miner outperforming all the others at 193 megahash a second at 416 watts, resulting in 0.46 megahash a second per watt. On Beamhash, which utilizes a bit of memory and core, only LOL Miner would work and resulted in 47.3 solutions a second at 410 watts, resulting in 0.11 solutions a second per watt. On Blake 3 Alephium, which is a core-intensive algorithm, 3 miners worked: BZ Miner, LOL Miner, and SRB Miner, with SRB Miner taking the lead at 3,403 megahash a second at 419 watts, resulting in 8.12 megahash a second per watt. On Blake 3 Ironfish, which is another core-intensive algorithm, 4 miners were supported: BZ Miner, SRB Miner, LOL Miner, and Team Red Miner, with Team Red Miner taking the lead at 30.42 gigahash a second at 420 watts, resulting in 0.072 gigahash a second per watt. On Dynex Solve, which uses a bit of the core and a bit of the memory, only 1 miner worked: BZ Miner, which got 7,660 hash a second at 395 watts, resulting in 19.4 hash a second per watt. On ETC Hash, which is a memory-intensive algorithm, 7 miners worked: BZ Miner, LOL Miner, SRB Miner, Team Red Miner, G Miner, Phoenix Miner, and Nano Miner, with Nano Miner taking a large lead over the pack with 110 megahash a second at 414 watts, resulting in 0.26 megahash a second per watt. This was verified on the pool, however, it is important to mention that it does fluctuate in hash rate more than the other miners. But even at the low results, it would hit 105 megahash a second, and near the top end 115 megahash a second, hence the average of around 110 megahash a second. On ET Hash, which is another memory-intensive algorithm, 5 miners worked: LOL Miner, Team Red Miner, SRB Miner, G Miner, and Nano Miner, with Nano Miner once again taking the lead with 110 megahash a second at 416 watts, resulting in 0.26 megahash a second per watt. On ET Hash B3, which is a memory-intensive algorithm, 2 miners worked: LOL Miner and SRB Miner, with SRB Miner taking the lead with 102.9 megahash a second at 414 watts, resulting in 0.24 megahash a second per watt. On Carlson hash, which is a core-intensive algorithm, 3 miners were supported: BZ miner, SRB miner, and LOL miner, with LOL miner taking the lead, getting 2,319 megahash a second at 419 watts, resulting in 5.53 megahash a second per watt. On Kapow, which uses a bit of memory and core, 4 miners were supported: WildRig, NanoMiner, BZ Miner, and SRB Miner, with SRB Miner taking the lead, mining at 57.12 megahash a second at 411 watts, resulting in 0.13 megahash a second per watt. On Memehash, which uses a bit of core and memory, only SRB Miner was supported, with 117 megahash a second at 410 watts, resulting in 0.28 megahash a second per watt. On Nexa Proof of Work, which uses a little memory and core, only LOL miner was supported with 118.13 megahash a second at 408 watts, resulting in 0.28 megahash a second per watt. On Pyron Hash, which is a core-intensive algorithm, 2 miners were supported: SRB Miner and LOL Miner, with LOL Miner taking a hefty lead, getting 7,880 megahash a second at 416 watts, resulting in 18.94 megahash a second per watt. On SHA-256DT, which is another core-intensive algorithm, 2 miners were supported: BZ Miner and SRB Miner, with SRB Miner taking the lead at 6,179 megahash a second at 420 watts, resulting in 14.7 megahash a second per watt. On SHA-3D, which is a core-intensive algorithm, 2 miners were supported: BZ Miner and SRB Miner, with SRB Miner taking the lead at 1,309 megahash a second at 419 watts, resulting in 3.12 megahash a second per watt. On SHA-512-256D, which is a core-intensive algorithm, 3 miners were supported: BZ Miner, SRB Miner, and LOL Miner, with LOL Miner taking the lead at 1,977 megahash a second at 419 watts, resulting in 4.72 megahash a second per watt. Finally, on ZIL Hash, which uses memory and core, 2 miners were supported: G Miner and LOL Miner, with LOL Miner taking the lead at 103.5 solutions a second at 414 watts, resulting in 0.3 solutions a second per watt. Before I get into overclocking, I did test dual mining to determine which algorithms have the highest impact on hash rate per watt. First, testing core-intensive algorithm impact on ETH hash, Blake 3 Alephium had the least impact with 0.23 megahash a second per watt, with Carlson hash impacting ETC hash the most, taking it down to 0.21 megahash a second per watt. Second, I also tested memory-intensive algorithm impact on hash rates on Blake 3 Alephium, where you can see ET hash has the least amount of impact at 4.47 megahash a second per watt, with ETC hash showing the most impact, taking Alephium down to 3.82 megahash a second per watt. Dual mining in and of itself has many factors and overclocking options. Due to the time commitment needed, I did not address any overclocking while dual mining. You can get a pretty good starting point from the overclocking I will now cover for single algorithms. It is important to note that all my power is recorded at the wall. For sanity checks, I did reference hashrate.no in comparison to software readings as well. That being said, in most cases, I have found that you can get better performance than reported on hashrate.no, or in some cases, there was no way to get close to the efficiency, as the wattage reports in software are incredibly off from what is showing at the wall, and the utilization of different miners report differently. Another note is that there are variances between different makes and models, therefore your mileage may vary. But I will cover the basic guidelines before providing specifics. As we know from the specs, this RX 7900 XTX from ASRock has a max boost clock of 2,615 megahertz, and the memory is clocked at 2,500 megahertz out of the box. It is safe to assume that the memory overclocks will be consistent across all makes and models outside of potential cooling issues. In the case of the GDDR6 onboard, the max overclock is 2,600 megahertz, which translates to 1,300 megahertz in Linux. When running memory-intensive algorithms, this should always be set to 1,300 megahertz, or 2,600 megahertz in Windows. A nice feature of the 7000 series is its ability to automatically clock the memory down to 97 megahertz when the memory is not being used. This means that things like Smart Memory Tune on MMPOS are not necessary. In fact, when using compute-heavy smart memory set to low, it will clock the memory to 772 MHz, resulting in higher power consumption over not touching the memory at all. Finally, on algorithms that utilize core and memory, there was some variance where a lower clock of memory provided the best efficiency. These also tend to benefit from Smart Memory Tune in MMPOS. A good starting point for algorithms such as KAS is 1050 MHz in Linux, which translates to 2100 MHz in Windows. With all of that out of the way, let's discuss the results. For the memory-intensive algorithm Autolycos V2, which most famously mines Ergo, it was very easy to find the best overclocks. Setting the core voltage to 680 MHz, core clock to 1225 MHz, and memory clock to 1300 MHz, we dropped the power draw to 286 watts at the wall and increased the hash rate to 205.9 megahash a second, resulting in 0.71 megahash a second per watt, which is a 55% increase in efficiency over stock. Now, just to clarify once again here, this sounds a lot worse than it actually is. Up to this point, most of the numbers you hear online are people looking at software. These settings will result in sub 200 watt software readings, which results in over 1 megahash a second per watt. But obviously, I wouldn't report that as fact due to what is actually being used at the wall. Another note here when it comes to power is that you could calculate efficiency of the HX1200 being 87% at this load and remove the 13% from the 286 watts, resulting in 248 watts of real world usage, and that results in 0.83 megahash a second per watt. Finally, on additional notes here is that you can get better efficiency off 200 to 240 volt circuits and platinum rated power supplies at over 50% utilization. Continuing forward in these videos, I will not address these caveats for brevity, but I will note in the description. Moving on to Beam Overclocks, which utilizes a bit of core and memory, means that it was important to test the variance of efficiencies on both mem and core. Efficiency did not increase with dropping the memory, meaning Beam does more heavily lean towards total memory bandwidth. Therefore, leaving the memory at 1300 MHz was preferred. This translated to the core as well, where dropping the core clock and voltage resulted in poorer performance than peak efficiency core clocks of 2300 MHz with voltage of 760 millivolts. This resulted in 52.9 solutions a second at 282 watts, for an efficiency of 0.187 solutions a second per watt, netting a massive 62% increase in efficiency over stock settings. Blake 3 Alephium is the algorithm I utilize to set the core intensive starting points and therefore have the most results for it. It was found that a core voltage is 740 millivolts with a core clock of 2200 megahertz and a memory clock of 97 megahertz results in the best efficiency with 2,870 megahash a second at 212 watts for an efficiency of 13.53 megahash a second per watt, netting a 66% increase in efficiency. For Blake 3 Ironfish, I started at the efficiency overclock for Blake 3 Alephium. I reduced the core voltage and clock initially and discovered that it increased efficiency. This continued all the way down to 1900 megahertz on the core at 720 millivolts on the clock, leaving the memory at 97 megahertz. Anything lower than 1900 megahertz resulted in a hang. This gave me 21.2 gigahash a second at 164 watts for an efficiency of 0.129 megahash a second per watt, which is a 78% increase in efficiency over stock clocks. Moving on to Dynex Solve, which utilizes memory and core, it was important to test both memory and core. However, it was quickly determined that dropping the memory overclock resulted in a reduction of efficiency and therefore was left at 1300 megahertz. For the core clock, dropping it down to 2000 megahertz and a core voltage of 730 millivolts resulted in the efficiency at 7850 hash a second at 273 watts, resulting in 28.75 hash a second per watt, netting a 48% increase in efficiency. On ET hash, it was pretty easy to determine the best overclock setting, which was setting the memory to 1300 megahertz and dropping the core clock to 1225 megahertz at 680 millivolts. This resulted in 115 megahash a second at 288 watts, resulting in 0.39 megahash a second per watt, netting a 49% increase in efficiency. This was a similar story on ET hash as well, utilizing the same overclocks as ETC hash, resulting in 115.82 megahash a second at 280 watts, resulting in 0.41 megahash a second per watt, netting a 56% increase in efficiency over stock clocks. As you all know, even ET hash B3 is similar to both ETC and ET hash. However, nanominer is not supported, so the max hash rates are slightly lower at 107.88 megahash a second at 285 watts, resulting in 0.37 megahash a second per watt, netting a 52% increase in efficiency over stock. Another core-intensive algorithm, Carlson hash, netted similar overclocking results to Blake 3 Alephium, with the core voltage at 720 millivolts, core clock at 1900 megahertz, and the memory clock at 97 megahertz. The 7900 XTX got 1673 megahash a second at 164 watts, resulting in 10.2 megahash a second per watt for an increase in efficiency of 84% over stock. Kapow is a beast and requires basically the highest core and memory clocks available within reason. Going above 2300 megahertz, however, did result in hang. So the final settings were a core voltage of 740 millivolts at 2300 megahertz on the core and 1300 megahertz on the memory for a hash rate of 59.7 megahash a second at 414 watts, resulting in 0.142 megahash a second per watt, which is only a meager 2% increase in efficiency. I messed with this one quite a lot and found little success in improving the situation, to the point where I would either lower the clocks to reduce the heat or avoid the algorithm altogether on the 7900 XTX. Meme hash is unique in that it does utilize both memory and core while favoring core. This meant lowering the memory clock to 1050 megahertz resulted in the best efficiency, while cranking the core to 2400 megahertz and the core voltage to 750 millivolts gave me 109 megahash a second at 286 watts, resulting in 0.38 megahash a second per watt for a 33% increase in efficiency. Next, a proof of work benefited from conservative clocks on both memory and core, with a core voltage of 740 millivolts, core clock of 2200 megahertz, and a memory clock of 1050 megahertz for 106.39 megahash a second at 301 watts, resulting in 0.35 megahash a second per watt for a 22% increase in efficiency over stock. Pyron hash threw another surprise out, as dropping the core clock resulted in better efficiency, but going to 1900 megahertz showed diminishing returns. The best efficiency settled in at 730 millivolts at 2000 megahertz on the core, with a memory at 97 megahertz for 5,650 megahash a second at 165 watts, resulting in 34.3 megahash a second per watt for a pretty significant 80% increase in efficiency over stock. SHA-256-DT was fairly simple, as it mimics a few other core-intensive algorithms, with a core voltage of 720 millivolts at 1900 megahertz, with a 97 megahertz underclock on the GPU clock, for 4,280 megahash a second at 168 watts, resulting in 25.4 megahash a second per watt for a 73% increase in efficiency over stock. SHA-3D utilized the same overclocks as SHA-256-DT for 904 megahash a second at 164 watts, resulting in 5.5 megahash a second per watt for a 76% increase in efficiency over stock. SHA-512-256D also used the same overclocks as the previous two, getting 1380 megahash a second at 173 watts, resulting in 7.9 megahash a second per watt for a 68% increase in efficiency. Finally, ZIL Hash utilizes memory and core clock, but threw a kink in the normal overclocks even further, where peak efficiency on the mem clock came in at 1200 megahertz, while going lower had diminishing returns, but simultaneously ate up the core, maxing out the 2400 megahertz at 760 millivolts, giving 99 solutions a second at 308 watts, resulting in 0.32 solutions a second per watt for a smaller increase of 28% increase in efficiency. When comparing results from hashrate.no, I achieved better software results on both Pyron Hash and Novo, most notably. However, on Radiant, it was not possible to match the efficiency results listed. Taking a look at overclocking performance for the RX 7900 XTX, there are clear benefits in core-intensive algorithms thanks to the memory clocking itself down when not in use. However, this is not enough to make up for the amount of power AMD pushed to gain these overall results. There was a clear focus on gaming for this GPU, and it has lost all the allure of the efficiency we saw with the RX 6000 series. Perhaps this changes with the rest of the 7000 series, which I will be testing later, so make sure you subscribe to see that. As far as memory-intensive algorithms are concerned, due to the amount of additional power required, it is the same story. The RX 7900 XTX belongs in a gaming PC, not in a mining rig. Funny how this was achieved with engineering and not software blocks like Light Hash Rate from NVIDIA. I am disappointed, as you know, I love big buses, but when the bus comes with a bunch of baggage, sometimes it's best to just let it go. Compounding the increased power problem is a lack of support. The 7000 series has been largely ignored by mining software developers, and that is sad. In reality, the high core clocks should result in better core-intensive algorithm hash rates than we are seeing. Alas, this is the same old story with AMD as always. People pay more for NVIDIA because it has more support, and developers focus on NVIDIA because they have a larger install base. Maybe one day this will not be the case, but for now it is. I cannot recommend the RX 7900 XTX at this time for mining. I do enjoy the card immensely though, and it holds a special place in my heart for the underdog attempt. As always, additional review materials and results will be available on sonofatech.locals.com. If you would like to see a full teardown of this card with thermal paste and pad replacement, please let me know in the comments. I will see you next Tuesday.